just going to start off with just a quick rundown, just a couple key takeaways from the plan, and then I'd be happy to take any questions that you all have. So hopefully you all have seen both the letter and then the attached memorandum, the detailed memorandum that accompanies the plan. Really, the focus of this entire endeavor was to identify strategies that OPDC could take in the short term that could have an immediate positive impact on the reduction in unrepresented folks within the state of Oregon. So we identified 7 strategies that we believe will be effective, particularly in those counties that have seen the highest numbers of unrepresented individuals over the last year or so. And so I think that the 3 main takeaways that I've focused on, or the 3 things that are really new that we see in this plan, is that, first, when we look across our different counties, particularly the 6 that have the highest numbers of unrepresented individuals, there's a lot of local nuances as to the causes and impacts. But what really each county's concerns boil down to, at least from an OPDC perspective, is a lack of capacity. That's the lever that we have the greatest control over at OPDC. But given the level of case filings that we've seen and the increase in those filings, an increase in capacity is what we can really focus on. And so the centerpiece of the plan that I would identify is the greater flexibility that OPDC will provide our contractors to be able to go over current caseload limits within the MAC model. And so for those individuals who are sufficiently experienced and who are willing to take cases over those maximums, I think that flexibility will be really key in each of our counties. And I think the third primary takeaway is the focus on data collection as well. We know that the data, we don't really have a lot of good data within the state as to what the provision of public defense services looks like. We also don't have a lot of data on the quality of public defense, whether that is, the first case somebody takes, or maybe the case they take, at 100% or over 100% over MAC. And so I think that having greater access to data and then also providing that in a transparent nature to stakeholders, media, legislators, what have you, will bring a lot of clarity to what we're seeing in public defense and the evolving nature of the service that we provide across the state. So that's what I prepared just to kick things off, but I'd be happy to take questions that you all have. I know you've sent some questions on, but since we have 2 folks, we can kind of go back and forth if you'd like. Yep, let's kick it off.
Okay, cool. I'll just get started here, and just wanted to ask you about the data collection and this transparency point. What differences are you making now that the prior administration was not doing in terms of this data collection?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't know if it's even as much as what the prior administration was not doing. I think we have a couple things that are happening at the same time. The first is we're continuing to work toward the implementation of a case management system that, once providers are utilizing that system, it will allow them to track data in a much more systematic way that then would plug directly into OPDC. So I think that's the first piece, but that is a year or 2 down the line. We're in the procurement phase for that data system. I think that maybe the pivot that we have is that, based on my experience working in other state agencies with our Oregon courts data, the Odyssey data, I believe that utilizing some of the data points that we're able to receive through Odyssey would be a good intermediate step toward having a more robust data understanding of what's going on. Odyssey will allow us to see what's happening in courtrooms in a sense, what our eventual full case management system, so maybe we could think more of a phase 2, will really allow us to do is we can track hours, we can really see where public defenders' effort is being devoted. For example, when I started my career, one of my goals was to move into public defense when I was a lot younger. And there were no body cameras then, right? There was not the proliferation of CCTV, ring cameras and everything like that. Now we're in a completely different world compared to even when I graduated from law school, to where lawyers are spending hours reviewing all of this footage. And so that's a new development within the field that impacts capacity. And so that's something that we should collect data on, and we should be able to articulate how that's impacting our system.
I can go ahead if you want to. I also wanted to ask a little bit. I spoke to a DA, the Washington County DA, Kevin Barton, yesterday, and he had some concerns with the OPDC's trial division. He said it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, is kind of how he described it, but he was saying you're shifting lawyers from one area to another instead of increasing net capacity. Do you understand his concerns with this trial division, and how do you see this trial division moving forward?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question as well. The legal community in Oregon is small. And so I think that certainly as we've rolled out our trial division, there have been some folks that have shifted to the trial division who previously worked in other public defense, firms or organizations that were within Oregon. I think around half of the folks that we've hired into the trial division have either come from out of state or were not folks who are working within the current public defense system, based on the information that we have. And so I understand his concern, and I think that our focus would be on expanding the number of lawyers, not just shifting the deck chairs.
I'll just keep going if it's okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think Ethan's having just some issues with his sound.
No worries at all. Yeah, and Ethan, if you ever want to jump in, totally understand. You can just interrupt me and hop in. But I just want to ask you too. How do you see this as a short-term resolvement, and then how does this lead into the long-term plan?
Yeah, thank you for that question too. So the short-term aspect of it is it's really focused on we're at an inflection point right now because we're at the end of a current contract term. And so there's a lot of changes that we can make relatively quickly that if we were looking at this issue at a different stage within our contract period would be a lot more difficult. And so the short-term focus is really on contractual changes, again, like I mentioned earlier, on increasing capacity within our current workforce. Longer term, I think that there are conversations that we need to have with system partners and other stakeholders to see what other efficiencies can be gained, both within kind of the public defense world itself, but then also within the greater court system with prosecutors, with sheriffs and jail access. Those are the types of conversations I think we need to have going forward, because when we look at the forecasting for the number of cases that are predicted to go out, there will be more and more of those coming in. And I think that given what we see in the legal labor market, even nationally, so not just in Oregon, there are fewer law students today than there were, for example, back in the early 2000s when I went to law school. And so the pool of potential folks is going to possibly remain somewhat stagnant. And so we may need to have some really important conversations about what cases enter the system or how they're treated. The state has set up a lot of programming that can give alternatives to simply just filing a case in court. There's new deflection programs that are being stood up across the state and other types of programs like that could have a real impact on the system. And I think we just need to have robust conversations amongst stakeholders as to how we should try to craft a well thought out holistic system as opposed to all of us working in our own individual silos.
Okay, there's a question in the chat here from Ethan. Does OPDC plan to assign more state-employed public defenders to Southern Oregon counties in the near future as part of this 12-month plan?
Thank you, Ethan, for that question. The answer to that question is a little bit TBD. We're waiting to get information on what our budget will be for the next 2 years from the legislature, and that should be coming any day now. And so the degree to which we can expand the trial division at all, and whether we can expand more in Southern Oregon is going to be budget dependent. But if we do receive positions from the legislature, then certainly we would be looking at trying to increase the number of folks working in each of those offices, and it'll just really depend on the numbers that we are able to bring in.
And I wanted to ask about some of the success that you've already seen from this trial division. I know that, I think it was in Jackson County, they've seen their percentages drop about 20%. Is that correct? What have you seen in those counties that you would like to see in the larger counties that have experienced the highest number of unrepresented individuals?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that what we're seeing in our counties where the trial division is having the greatest impact is that the trial division is really both become truly integrated into that system and works as one of the cogs in that system, in addition to being able to utilize some of its flexibility for things like early resolution dockets. And so when we look at some of our counties, in the Portland metro area, for example, I think it comes down to both of those things: greater integration within the pre-existing system, greater collaboration between all of the different public defense entities. But then too, we're in conversations to try to develop some early resolution dockets in those counties as well. And so I think those are the two areas where you begin to see the most bang for your buck. And that's where we're focused right now with our trial division.
Okay, I'll ask another one here too. I did want to ask about the recruitment of Oregon law students. You did just mention a little bit earlier that you're seeing less and less lost students right now. How do you think that outreach is going to improve the amount of students graduating in the short term and the long term?
Well, I think that we need to have a greater connection into our law schools, and that's what we've begun developing. And what young folks need to see is how this work occurs, and then also they can essentially have an opportunity to try it out, before they commit. And so my hope is that we have a relatively high number of folks who begin to go through these programs. I believe there's around 50 right now who have been enrolled in across the 3 law schools over this past year. And if you could even get half of those to want to pursue a career in public defense, or even a third of those, then that would be a real net positive for the state. And so I think that by deepening those connections, and especially from an agency standpoint, really showing these law students that this is a promising career that you can go into, that brings a lot of respect and a lot of satisfaction, then that's something that would be a good recruiting tool within those law schools. And so I think that it's us being more purposeful in trying to make sure that we're playing a role in recruiting as well. And I think this program is a good first step toward that.
And then just another question for you. I did want to ask about the potential of burnout for these experienced attorneys. The Washington County DA did say that, it's all about making sure that the people that can do more. But is there a potential that you see of these experienced attorneys possibly just retiring because they have all this work?
Yeah, that I think that's a concern that we all have, and maybe not the retirement piece necessarily, but burnout is certainly a concern. I think, but that's why we focused when we are trying to set up the guardrails for the ability to go over the case limits, that first, it is voluntary. You do get paid for that work. Currently, anybody who does go over MAC levels now does not get paid for it. And so I think that those are two things that could combat burnout to an extent. We also, in the plan, identified that the way that we want to roll this out is we want to be proactive in asking folks ahead of time what they think they can handle as far as their ethical limits are concerned, but then also from a burnout perspective. And so the ability to go up to 15% over MAC is not a requirement that you do. What we would solicit from them is to say, how many cases do you think above your current caseload you could take? If it's 5% over MAC, then that's what we would look to give them. If it's 10%, 15%, that's what we would look to give them. And so I would hope that the voluntary nature of it and the fact that we're asking them ahead of time to be able to look back at their caseloads over time and to consider where they could be, that would be something that could help combat burnout. But then also thinking about the quality of services that are provided, that goes back to the data collection aspect. One of the things that I would really want to look at is a comparison, an average comparison of some outcomes on the cases you take that are under the maximum and the ones you take over, at least to ensure that there's consistency across the delivery of services to clients, depending on whether it's your very first case you took this year or your very last case.
And then my last question for you is just going to be about these new contracts that would make sure that some of these underperforming or these different organizations, excuse me, I can't think of the right word right now, but these organizations that are falling below their percentage, and there's new enforcement requirements that are making sure that these public or these organizations, I can't think of the word right now, but are meeting their goals instead of falling behind. Can you explain that a little bit more for our viewers and how this is going to be different from past plans?
Yeah, and I apologize. That's a little bit of a more difficult question to answer. I've not seen the templates, like the new contract template. I know what the intent is exactly as you stated it, is to make sure that we have greater enforcement mechanisms. I need to see the language. I've not seen the language that we've been working on with DOJ yet specifically, so it's a little hard for me to comment on that. I think the one comment I would make is that what we're really endeavoring to do is to have contractual terms that give us greater enforcement ability, but then also allows us or really encourages contractors to have more frank conversations with us about what they can handle. I do think we want to make sure that the maximum that we ask folks to do does not turn into the minimum. But also there needs to be folks doing a reasonable amount of work compared to what their colleagues are doing as well. And so the contractual terms we're trying to develop would attempt to strike that balance so that we can ensure that everybody is working to the greatest of their ability to address the crisis.
There's a question here from Ethan. Beyond the early disposition program and plan DUII / probation violation dockets in Jackson County, are there any other specific initiatives or pilot programs being considered for Southern Oregon to address the challenges of public defense in our more rural areas?
As far as early resolution programs, I think that that's where we're standing right now. I think that we're always open to more creativity as to identifying cases. We have been working on, and I apologize, let me see from the chat from your list. Okay, I didn't realize the probation one. Yeah, the probation docket is one we're working on. I was thinking of the DUII. So I wouldn't say that there are additional early resolution dockets being considered in Jackson County right now, but the other interventions that were identified in the plan, specifically letting folks go over the maximum attorney caseload, I believe there were 8 folks that we were able to pre-identify within Jackson County that could have the ability to provide additional capacity there. And so I think that these other interventions are designed, even if they're not specific to Jackson County, they're designed to help within our Southern Oregon counties. Same thing, I think, with the ability to go over MAC. There were 2 individuals who we were able to find in Coos County that could be eligible for that. And so I think that'll be one of our main areas of focus.
Okay, well, any more questions? Going once, going twice. We've got 1 more minute left. Okay, well, thanks again for your interest. If you have any technical follow-up questions, feel free to send them to me and I can get answers for you. And I will send you the recording files.
Thank you so much, both. Thank you both so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yep, thank you all.